Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of our series on developing solutions for Microsoft Azure Exam AZ 204. Today is the fifth session, which we are uh, which we have started today, and the agenda for this particular session would be implementing IaaS solutions or infrastructure as a service solutions, which Microsoft Azure has to offer to us. So without further ado, I'll just start with the set of modules that we are going to cover today and what is on the agenda. So the IaaS infrastructure that Microsoft Azure has to offer, it mostly is related to the servers, the virtual machines, the containers, the container registries, which physical hardware or physical server related activities or infrastructure that Microsoft Azure has to offer. We'll see how some of those can be leveraged and deploy our solutions. So the objective of this particular session would be to learn how to create and deploy virtual machines, resources using one of the most important components of Azure, which is called ARM or Azure Resource Manager, using some templates. And then I'll also show you a quick demo around how to manage and deploy containers, which makes life a lot easier in terms of deploying applications on server like infrastructure, but on a very lightweight scale. So these are the four sub-modules that we are going to cover today. The first one would be provision of the virtual machines, which are the traditional virtual machines that cloud infrastructure offers. The second would be deploying any sort of resource on Azure using something which is called as Azure Resource Manager templates, which is basically a JSON file which gets translated by the ARM platform, and then your resources are pretty much handled. The deployment of the resources are handled that way. The third submodule that we will cover today would be something around Azure Container Registries. And the fourth one would be around Azure Container Instances. So there is a similarity or a relationship between container registries and container instances, which are mostly around something, the container services that we use today, like Dockers, Kubernetes, and stuff. So that is something wherein we will try to have a look at how they will work around those. So without further ado, I'll just jump on straight to my Azure portal and start with the demo. So let me just stop this presentation for you. Okay. So we have landed into our familiar Azure uh, portal dashboard, where we have been using this particular portal for most of our sessions for the past 4 weeks, and we have seen how different components are deployed and managed from this portal. It's a very easy and sort of not a very complex dashboard to handle for people who have started using this. And naming conventions and stuff are also pretty standard for Microsoft. So the first thing that we're going to do, like what we have done for the past 4 weeks, is that we're going to create a resource group first. So as I have mentioned in my previous sessions as well, that resource groups are quite important when you are trying to deploy some infrastructure or any resources on cloud, which you're going to club together in some sort of logical organization. So for now, I am going to do this in a session 5 resource group, because I know that when I look at my resources which I have, I know that these resources belong to a particular demo session, and I can pretty much remove them whenever I want or manage them as required. So the first thing that we'll do is create a resource group. So we'll just start with a resource group on the search bar. I'll just click on the resource groups, click on create, and the ever-friendly resource group creation wizard comes up. So one of the things that has changed with the past 4 sessions is that my Azure trial expired. So the 1 month trial, which I mentioned, is available with Azure, that got expired, and I had to upgrade to a paid subscription, which is for me the Microsoft Partner Networks. So that is what I'm using. This gives me some benefits in terms of now I can use a lot of premium services, but the downside of that is that I have to pay for them now. So anyways, I'll just select my subscription, whichever is available to me. create the resource group. Let me just call it as session 5 or something. And then the resource group region would be something which I am near to, which is India. So I'll just choose my resource as Central India, uh, choose the tags. I don't need them. Then I'll just go to the verification window. All the validations have passed, and I'll just click on create so that my resource group gets created. So that's my resource group that's created. And now I pretty much can deploy my resources around these. All right. So the first resource that we are trying to see today is around the virtual machines. So virtual machines, how do virtual machines help us in a cloud environment? Think of a scenario wherein you need a physical machine with a operating system. It could be either a Linux-based operating system or a Windows-based operating system, and you need a physical machine to have some of your activities done. It is not always possible that we can create applications which are web-based or which are mostly available on web or on some sort of a deployed shared service. We sometimes need an operating system backed sort of a machine that does our job, maybe a small batch job that needs to run, a small scheduled activity which I can do, which requires some sort of a operating system intervention as well, or maybe a small desktop application that is required by the team, or which is not available on web, but it's a desktop application or something which the team needs, and they can just remotely connect to that server and do their work and just come back. So for this, or even a development machine for that instance, if you do not have a physical machine uh, which pretty much cuts your requirements, maybe you can create a virtual machine and do your work over there, connect to that remotely and do your work and then switch it off. Uh, the benefit of a virtual machine is that you get an entire machine with an operating system of your choice. You can install, uninstall whatever you need, exactly like what you do on your own machines. Downside of it is that since it's on the cloud, obviously the resource would be a little costly. When I say costly, if you look at the cost of running the VM, it is mostly a compute-based costing that happens. Uh, but if you compare that with purchasing your own server infrastructure, managing that server infrastructure on a data center or on your own premises, with continuous power supply, internet supply, static IPs, periodic maintenances, patches, updates, security, everything. When you pretty much combine all of those overheads along with the capital expenditure that you make on actually procuring the server, sometimes you have to calculate the return on investment that you have on the actual purchase and maintaining of the server compared to when you do it on the Azure virtual machine. So those virtual machines that we'll be creating and will be seeing, they obviously have different pricing tiers based on the hardware infrastructure that they provide and what are your requirements. So in cloud, whenever one of the mantras that we follow is that uh, only use the minimum amount of resources that is required. So while procuring our hardware infrastructure that we do physically, we usually tend to go for a higher spec machine just to make that a future-proof machine so that we do not need to buy new machines time and time again. So we do that. But for cloud, you do not need to worry about that. You just have to deploy a machine which has ample amount of resources, which just is sufficient for getting the work that you need done. So that should be the approach that we need to follow whenever we are doing deployments on cloud. So without taking any more delay, I'll just start with my deployment of the virtual machines. It's pretty straightforward actually. You just have to go to create a resource. You find the this. It usually is available under popular Azure services. If not, you can just search for that. Like you can just search for virtual machine and virtual machine, and that should just come up, and you should just have an option to deploy what virtual machine you want. If you do not have that option or you do not want to go there, you just go directly from the portal and search for virtual machines, and that should come up over here as well. As soon as you start that, you pretty much have a window. I already have a virtual machine that's running for my instance. I want to create one more, so I'll just click on create. So these are the options that I have. Azure virtual machine. It's a classic virtual machine hosted on Azure. Then you have Azure virtual machine with preset configuration. So this is a new one wherein Azure gives you different images of virtual machines on different operating systems with some predefined configurations as well, like some sort of workloads for doing some maybe Visual Studio already installed, SQL Server already installed, Oracle installed. So those are some of the workloads that are available. Then there is Azure Arc Virtual Center virtual machine. If you want to create Arc virtual machines, which is a it's a non-Azure environment, which is where the virtual machines are created, and you want a similar virtual machine on that environment created inside Azure. You can use this. One more virtual machines solution that is available and that is quite common in the IT infrastructure world is called VMware. So in VMware, if you have a physical machine, but you want that physical machine's entire compute not to be used as a single machine, but distribute it into different virtual machines, you install VMware and then use that common resource to create virtual machines of your own. So that is called VMware. So Microsoft Azure now supports VMware as well. So if you want those, you can use that. But for this demo, I'll just use the classic virtual machines that Azure has to offer. I'll just click on this and the wizard for this should start up. Okay. So while going through this setup, I'll just talk about different options that we have and the different features and functionalities that the Azure Virtual Machine actually offers us. So the first thing that we need to do, as usual, we need to just select the resource group where this resource would be deployed. So I'll just choose the newly created session 5 over here. Then I need to give a name to a virtual machine. Let's just give it a name called test VM1 or something. Then you need to choose the regions. I'll choose Central India, which is the resource group. So Central India is already selected. If you want to change it, you can do that. Then we have the options of availability options like the zones and whether it's going to be availability. You want to deploy it with redundancy on an availability zone, on a machine scale set, or an availability set. I'm not going to dwell deep into these because I believe in the past two sessions, my colleague Rishabh discussed these and detailed them out quite well. So I'm not going to do that, but it's just wanted to point out that these are required if you want your virtual machine to have redundancy options available, which means that you want a highly available virtual machine, which has a fault tolerance, and if the virtual machine goes down on one of the regions, it is available. So that sort of redundancy, if you need, you choose the option that is best suited for you. Else, for this demo, I'm just going to choose a no infrastructure redundancy required option, which means that I don't need a redundancy, which means it's just going to be one instance of me running. Then there is this option called security. The basic level of security, if you want, it's the standard, which means the virtual machines would have the Azure basic virtual security configured, the firewalls, the Microsoft Defenders, everything already pre-configured, everything behind firewalls on Azure side, local firewalls on the software side in the Windows firewall, all enabled previously. Then you might want to have a virtual machine which you want to have more security options. So if you want that, this is the option that's trusted launch virtual machines, which basically protects your virtual machines from persistent and constant attacks that come on the machine, which could be from some sort of a DDoS attack, some virus attacks. Those level of continuous monitoring and securing is something which you can choose as well. And this is something which is the topmost sort of security that Microsoft Azure has to offer for virtual machines. But this is still in preview and not available on most of the platforms as of now. But it should get available in a few in some time in future. So for us, I'm just going to choose the standard one. Then this is the most important part of the virtual machine creation, which is the image. So image is basically the operating system or the operating system with some sort of workload installed, which is basically the image that gets installed on your virtual machine, and the operating system with whatever workload you want that gets installed. So you get a few list of virtual machines over here, which are commonly used by people, like the Ubuntu server images, SUSE Enterprise, Red Hat, Oracle, Linux, CentOS. From Windows, you have Windows 10, 11, then you have the Windows 2016, 2019, and 2022 data center Azure editions or common data center editions with Gen 2 servers. So these are some of the commonly used and popular resources that people generally use. So these are some of the ones that you could choose. If there is an image that you do not see or you want to explore more, you can just click on this hyperlink called See All Images, and then you have you are redirected to the marketplace of Azure, where you see all the different options that Microsoft has to offer. So there are about 79 pages of them, and each page has about 5 or 20, so 18 to 20, about 1600 different images that you have or different options that you can choose from in terms of which type of virtual machine you want to deploy. So we'll not make it as complex. We'll just go in here and probably we will deploy Azure Windows Server, probably a Windows Server 2022. Let's choose the latest one, 2022 Data Center Edition. And in this, as soon as you do that, uh, so hardware resources when you deploy, which are not shared resources like what you have in the app services, uh, Azure checks whether that particular infrastructure that you're trying to deploy into the region that you are deploying this. Like for us, we are trying to deploy this server on Central India region, and this is the size or the SKU that we are trying to deploy. So what Microsoft would do once we review and create this during the validation phases is that it will also check whether the data center or the place where this is going to be deployed, whether it has actually got that amount of resources or not. So since I am on right now, I'm using a paid subscription. So usually that sort of a problem is not encountered in a paid subscription. But if you are on a free trial subscription, it is quite possible that when you try to choose these different virtual machine images, you might see an option. You might see an error that would say that uh, this workload or this image is not available in this region, or your subscription does not support this, or your subscription has exceeded the resource quota, or these sort of error messages in these lines. So basically what happens is that Microsoft has its data centers with dedicated hardware resources already available. Microsoft offers these paid subscriptions as well as free trial subscriptions with about $200 worth of credits for us. But if you think about it, if the resources, if people just keep on using free trial with new accounts and they keep on using the infrastructure that Microsoft has to offer, and the entire infrastructure can be divided into whomever they want, it might happen that the paid customers might not get resources allocated to them because the free trial users are using them. So what they have done is they have reserved some of the infrastructure on each of the regions for free purposes. So for free trial users, if they come up and they choose a particular region, they choose a particular resource, if that infrastructure resources are available in that on the free quota side of it, you are given that access and your resources are deployed. But if not, then you just have to wait or try again. But with paid subscriptions, this is not the case. It is usually always available because Microsoft has huge data centers that they have, and the resources are pretty much available for the paid customers. So right now, I won't get that error probably because I am on a paid service subscription right now. So I'm just going to choose this. And then one of the other important decisions that you have to make is in terms of sizing of the VMs. So while choosing the size of the VM, I'll just like to basically tell you something about how these sizing of virtual machines are done. So there are different sets of uh, requirements that you might have for the virtual machine. Maybe it's just a testing virtual machine that you just want to test something on, or you just want to have a virtual machine which is available and you want to maybe run some scheduled scripts on that, which requires some sort of operating system intervention. Or you might want to have an entire server with IIS and everything, or any sort of databases and web servers, all like a traditional server infrastructure deployed. So those requirements are something which you need to nail down first. So you have to see which type of requirement you have. Uh, so one of the things, if you come into this page, you see that there are a huge number of sizes of VMs that we have got to choose from. So these are grouped into these values, like the most used by Azure users is where all the sizes which are mostly used by Azure users are shown here. And you will see the name of these, which are called SKUs. Then you have the type, which is in this case general purpose, the number of virtual CPUs, what is the amount of RAM that you get, the number of data disks that you get, what is the maximum IOPS in terms of input output, what is the temp storage in terms of gigabytes, what is the temp storage value, whether that particular SKU supports a premium disk in terms of SSDs, which make read writes faster, whether that is available or not, and an approximated uh, cost per month for that particular VM. So you can see that these virtual machines start from 799 rupees per month, and they might go for the highest one in here is about 41,443 rupees per month. So you can see that the one which is about 800 rupees per month, it has just one CPU, 1 gigabytes of RAM, two data disks, the 320 IOPS, which is quite less, 4 GB of temp storage. So it comes at around 799 plus. It is an average or an approximated cost because the costs might differ in terms of the amount of compute that you do as well. So that also adds up if it's more than what Microsoft calculates. So it's an hourly based cost, and usually what they do is they average it around for a day, they average it around 10 to 12 hours per day, and then multiply it with the number of days in a month, and then they come up with this. So that is the average cost, but it might be a little on a higher side or lower side based on how you use that. If you keep the virtual machine running, you will have the cost that is shown in here. If you use it, shut it down, and then reuse it again whenever you want it, then the cost might come down as well. So these are some of the pricing VM sizes that we have. Then you have these groups like the D series. These are different sets of processors that Microsoft has to offer in terms of the virtual CPUs. So you can choose which type of uh, processor you want in your machine, and that also has different varieties, options, which might have an impact on your costs. So these are different levels of or different VM sizes that you want. For the purpose of this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, let's say that this one, which is B2S, which is a general purpose virtual machine with two virtual CPUs, 4 GBs of RAM, four data disks, 8 GB of temp storage, and costs about 2,776.91 rupees per month. But since I'm going to just create this for this demo and then delete it, and most probably not going to incur a lot of cost. It might be a few rupees here and there just while we are having this demo. So I'm just going to choose this. And this one is actually something wherein you need to decide what type of work you are going to dedicate or delegate that virtual machine to do. So the VM types that we are seeing, it could be general purpose. It can be compute optimized, wherein CPU to memory ratio is high. Then you have memory optimized, wherein compute optimized is where you have higher CPU compared to the RAM. Memory optimized is where you have higher memory or RAM compared to the CPUs. Storage optimized is where you have higher storage but lesser CPUs and RAM. Then you have GPU, which is quite used these days on different sets of hashing or mining operations. So if you want a virtual machine to do mining for you, you can have a GPU based virtual machine as well. And then there are ones which are high performance computes, which have higher CPUs, higher RAMs, higher GPUs, higher storage, and everything on a premium side. And so obviously they will cost a lot as well. But if that is a requirement, you can obviously go with that. So Microsoft has those options as well. So I'm just going to choose this B2S option and click on select. And I'll just come to this screen back again. These options have been already chosen. I'll just choose a username for this. You cannot use a username like admin because that is something which is a reserved word. So what I'll do is I'll just use SkyPycast admin. Uh, and then the password has to be about 12 and 123 characters long. And it has its own set of uh, strong password policies implemented. So you have to put those across as well. So let me just put something in here. Did not get that. Okay. Yeah, I'll put. Okay. Now the passwords match. They have been added. Now these are some of the network related common rules that have to be implemented. Like, do you want your virtual machine to be uh, accessible on any public ports or not? So public ports by default are disabled on virtual machines, meaning that any sort of inbound ports, any sort of incoming requests are by default disabled for security reasons. But one of the inbound ports that can be enabled would be either a SSH port, uh, the AT port, which is HTTP, the HTTPS 443, or the RDP if you want to connect your machine using a remote desktop connection. So RDP is something, since I'm using a Windows image, RDP would be a better option. If it was a Linux machine, I would have used an SSH to connect to my virtual machine. But since it's a Windows machine, I'm just going to use and open up the RDP port so that I can remotely connect to the desktop over there. One of the other things that you can also do on Microsoft Office is the licensing. So let's say that you are deploying a machine on a Windows on a Windows version, like for us, it's the Windows Server 2022. Uh, it is quite possible that you or your organization might have Windows operating system licenses with you, uh, which might be unused that you have already got. Uh, in here, when you deploy a virtual machine with a operating system, the license cost of that particular operating system are added with your monthly costs. So it's a recurring cost that is divided per month. So the licensing cost is not taken at once or in one time when you are deploying this, which means that all the operating system cost or the license cost that you're picking up, that is just made part of your per month cost. One of the things that you can do is, if you already have your licenses procured for the Windows operating system, you can use that existing license in here. So if that is the case, then you can just choose this option, and then you basically have to go through the licensing process wherein you integrate that license in here, and that has quite an impact on the price actually, and which as per Microsoft is about 49% of the cost. So because most of the cost that these virtual machines have, uh, mostly half of the cost is around the hardware infrastructure, and pretty much the other half goes in terms of the licenses. So license does have an impact on the cost of the infrastructure that you are deploying. So if you do have uh, the operating system licenses available as part of maybe Microsoft Partner Network, or you might have procured them for some reason, you can use them and get the cost down as well using the hybrid Azure hybrid benefit policies. So since I do not have those, I'll just use the licenses that Microsoft provides. And then I'll just click on next, choose the disk. In here, I'll choose which type of disk I want on my VM as for the hard disk. Whether I want premium SSD or a standard SSD or a standard HDD. So these do have an impact on the cost because SSDs are premium, which means they are the fastest SSDs that are dedicated for you, and they do have very low read-write speeds, resulting in higher performance in your virtual machine. You can go with an SSD, but not a premium one, a standard one, which is quite faster, but not as fast compared to the premium SSDs that Azure has to offer. Or you can just go with a standard HDD or a hard disk, which is non-SSD, old style hard disk drives, which are comparatively cheaper in terms of deployment. So for now, we can choose anything that we want and just go with the standard HDD. There is an option that you can see over here, which is delete with VM. It is by default checked, which means that if I delete the virtual machine, the hard disk associated with that will get deleted along with that. If you have a requirement where you want to detach your hard disk when the virtual machine is deleted, but do not want to delete that hard disk, you want to keep the data, you want to use that data disk with some other virtual machine later on, you just deselect this option, and when the virtual machine is deleted, the disk is not deleted automatically. Next, we have the option of encryption, which means that the data and everything that is available on your virtual machine, whether that gets encrypted or not, by default, there is no option these days for no encryption. It is always encrypted. But how do you encrypt that? The default would be to encrypt at rest with a platform managed key, which means that the encryption keys are managed by Azure itself. Or you can do an option of encryption at rest with a customer managed key, wherein the encryption key would have to be managed by you. And this is a single encryption. These both are single encryptions. Then there is an option of a double encryption with platform managed and customer managed keys. It means that the data is encrypted both by two keys actually. One managed by Azure, one managed by you. It means that even if one of the keys gets compromised, the encryption doesn't fail, or the data is not compromised actually. So it is a more higher level of encryption security. If you want that, you can have that. I'm just going to go with the defaults in here. Then click on networking. In here, every virtual machine automatically is made part of a virtual network in Azure infrastructure. Because unless they put it into a virtual network, we won't be able to access those, because it would be an isolated VM that just got created in the cloud space, and we are not able to access that over the network because it is not part of any virtual network. So they by default create it. So what you can do is the virtual network, either you can just allow Microsoft to create its own virtual network for your virtual machine, or if you already have a existing virtual network on your organization and you want this particular machine to be part of that, you can just choose that from the drop downs. Then you have to choose the subnet. So the subnet is basically the class of IP address that gets assigned to your machine and the range of IP addresses that can be assigned to that particular machine. So this is a subnet that gets assigned. It is usually the default. You do not have a lot of choice in that. It usually is driven by the virtual network that gets created. Then you have a public IP. Because it's a virtual machine, you need to access it. You need a public IP through which you connect to it either on an SSH or an RDP. So you just choose the option, let it create a new IP. The network security, what type of security you want. If you want, you can have a no security, basic or advanced, which are the public inbound ports, which was actually already selected in the first screen, but it's all again confirmed over here. Then you have an option of load balancing. So in a server infrastructure on a data center environment, let's say that if you have multiple instances of your virtual machine that get created, you can put them behind a load balancer so that the request that comes in, the load balancer can manage based on a particular uh, traffic on a particular port on your virtual machine, whether that port is uh, is getting a lot of requests or not. If it is, then it just moves the subsequent request to some other server which is part of that same cluster. So that is how a load balancer basically manages or distributes the load between different virtual machines that are behind them. So that if you create a virtual machine a set of virtual machines with similar attributes and hosting the same application. If one of them gets a lot of requests and gets getting overloaded, the load balancer automatically chooses the other one which is free or has lesser load. So if that sort of requirement is required, you can have the Azure load balancer or an application web application gateway. Both are actually load balancers. Application gateway is a web-based load balancer, while Azure load balancer is a hardware-based load balancer that can be used. So for us, that's not a requirement that we have right now. So I'll just go to management, see if there is anything that I require in here. The boot diagnostics, I just enable them so that if there is anything that's happening at the boot time, I can see those. If you want, you can enable the OS diagnostics, guest diagnostics. Uh, I, if you want your VM to be accessed using the Active Directory users, you can use this option of system assigned managed identity, which means Active Directory users would be able to access it. There are two options in here, either the identity, system assigned managed identity, or Azure AD users. So these are some of the options that you can choose. You can have an option to choose an auto shutdown if the virtual machine is idle for quite some time. It gets shut down automatically. If you want a DR site to be created, which means if the virtual machine goes down and you want a disaster recovery or a recovery VM or a recovery site created somewhere so that that can be recovered from there, you can enable those. How does your OS updates? So the patch orchestration options could be chosen, which is automatic or manual. Automatic should be the way to go so that you do not have to worry about when the updates have to happen. So these are some of the options that just come into this management part. Then we go to advanced. There is an option that if you want some sort of an extension to get installed on your machine. So what are the extensions that we can install? So this is when you choose an extension, it just uh, basically gives you these options like some sort of whether you want application insight to run in there, whether you want some sort of a pipeline agent, whether you want maybe a Kaspersky hybrid cloud security. So these are different extensions that Microsoft has to offer, like OpenSSH you want, if you want NVIDIA GPU driver extension. So these are the extensions that Microsoft has to offer for a virtual machine. So you can just choose any of these, and if you want, Microsoft would automatically install those extensions with you as well. Then there are virtual machine applications that can be installed, or you can have some sort of a script that you want to run when this VM gets deployed. So those are some of the things that can be added. Then the host, if you want your physical server to be part of a host group, you can do that. Then there is capacity reservations, proximity placement groups. So these are some of the options that can be enabled as well. The last option is the tagging feature, which we mentioned. It is just for organizing the resources so that they are identified properly later on. And then we go to review and create and see one last time what are the options we have set and what is going to be an approximate cost of that particular machine per hour. So this comes at around 3.8 rupees per hour. So this is something, if this all looks good, the validation has passed, you can just click on create and that virtual machine should start getting deployed. So we'll just see this screen come up, which is the Azure Resource Manager deployment screen. It just goes through all the steps. If something bad happens, you see what the error is, or you just click on refresh and you see all the steps that are pretty much happening at the backend. And it takes some few minutes to get this deployed. And that's how these servers are deployed. So that's pretty much what is required. And it basically is mostly related to which type of server, what is the size of the server, which type of image you want, and those sort of customizations are absolutely available to you. So that is something that we can do. So while this is happening, I'll quickly jump onto the second module because that is something which I just want to use this time in between and show you, which is called Azure Resource Manager templates. So this deployment that you are currently seeing, this deployment actually what happens is that there is a template file based on all the different set of options that we chose. previously, if you go to this part, which is template, while this deployment is happening, you'll see that there is a JSON file that's created. And it's a quite an exhaustive JSON file that is available there. And this JSON file is basically, uh, it's called a template file. And what happens is that this template file is something which is called as an ARM template. And it's a JSON file. And the options that you chose, those were just a wizard that Microsoft Azure gives you. But it is not actually deploying those resources directly over there. What it did is it asked you those questions, and based on those questions, prepared this JSON file, which is the template file. And then this template got submitted to what is called as Azure Resource Manager. So the Azure Resource Manager gets these requests either from the portal, it can come from the Azure CLI, which is the command line interface, it can come from RESTful clients, APIs, it can come from PowerShell scripts, anywhere. So what you can do is, or you can basically create your own templates in the format that Microsoft Azure expects. And what you can do is you can have that JSON created and deploy those custom uh, templates based on your own requirements over here. So what happens here is that the instance, I'll just use this particular example of deploying this virtual machine that we just did. Think of a scenario wherein this exact same VM has to be deployed maybe 20 or 100 times. So it won't be wise to do the exact same steps that I did, because those are the same values that I'm going to use, the same elements that I'm going to use, but I'm just going to replicate them 20 or 100 times. I'm going to create 20 or 100 different resources. But if I just go to those next wizard sort of approach for 100 times, it's going to take a lot of time, and that should not be something which should be done. So what we can do instead is that we can just create like what we did. I can just save this template, and whenever I want, I can just deploy this template, just configure the values like the username, password, the name of the VM. Those are some of the parameters that can just be implemented. Like if you look at this inputs section on that, which says the location, the network interface name. So these are the inputs that basically have to be configured. Rest of the other things are already managed by the template, and you can just keep on redeploying that particular template just by uh, changing the values of the names and stuff, and it automatically gets pushed to the Azure Resource Manager, and the Resource Manager, based on the template, continuously redeploys them. Okay, so this is how Azure Resource Manager works, and these are the template files that can be used or reused for having these. One of the ways that we can create these resource files as well is by an option called deploy a custom template. So you can find this by just going to the search and selecting template. I'm just going to type in template, and you'll see templates in here. Go in there. You can create your own templates in here. Create template. It will ask you different questions about that, give you a sample, and you can just keep on working on them. You'll see an ARM template in here, and you can just keep on working on that if you are aware of that format or something. And then you can just create this JSON file, and to deploy this, you need to go to template, and you have an option of deploy a custom template. Uh, in here, you choose the option build your own template in the editor. Either you can create the entire template file in here as well by clicking on the parameters, variables, resources, everything has to be created. Or if you already have a template file created, you just load that file. You just choose the JSON file that get created, and then you have the option of saving that, and it automatically gets redeployed. So this is what Azure Resource Manager is, which is basically a layer in the Azure infrastructure, which takes up these template files, submits the portal or the shell or CLI, basically submits these templates into the Azure Resource Manager, and the Resource Manager does its work and just deploys the resources based on the availability of the infrastructure on that certain region. So now I'll just go back to the virtual machine that we just created. I'll just go to this test VM1. Let me see it has got deployed. In here, what I'm interested in is in this, which is the public IP address, because I need that to connect. So I'll just copy that to my clipboard. To connect a virtual machine remotely, which is a Windows virtual machine, you need to open up your run command, which is Windows R, and you type in mstsc, which is run command to open the remote desktop connection. So this is the one. You can either use this or you can just go to start and start typing in remote, and you should have this option as well, remote desktop. Now I just type in the IP address that I got from the VM, click on connect. I hope I remember the password. So Skype iCast admin and click on OK. It will just ask because it's a secure connection that happens between my machine and the remote. So there's a certificate that is validated every time the requests are made. So it just checks whether you want to accept that certificate or not. I'll just choose yes. It will go through the configuration processes, and this is the virtual machine desktop that starts opening up. Since it is the first time that we are opening this virtual machine, you will see a server manager screen and everything. That usually comes up whenever you install a new operating system. We'll just wait for a few minutes to see how this happens. So once everything boots up, you should see the desktop with the default recycle bin icon, and the server manager should start opening up. And now you can pretty much use this machine like what you would do in a physical machine. You can pretty much use it like that. Just start with the configuration processes and everything. And that's it. And you can use this as you want to use this virtual machine for. And you can have these defined for whatever role and work that you want to do. And that's pretty much it. Yes, one of the things that I would like to mention at this point in time is that any type of virtual machine, be it on a cloud or on physical servers as well, if it's a Windows virtual machine, the maximum number of simultaneous connections that you can make on that would be two. But that also is by default disabled by the operating system. But if you want that, you can enable that. And you can have at a maximum of two simultaneous connections that can be made to a Windows virtual server. But if you want more people to access that simultaneously, more than two, then you need to enable the remote desktop services on that particular virtual machine. One of the disclaimers in this is that Windows Server allows at most two uh, simultaneous connections. If you want more, you need to purchase what is called as CALs, which are licenses for multiple simultaneous users. If it was a physical machine that I had deployed with a Windows, I would have to had buy that CAL license from Microsoft or a partner. But since it's on Azure, as soon as I enable the remote desktop services and limit the number of users or set the number of simultaneous users that I want, the CALs based on the number of active users that are accessing that, it automatically is added. The cost of those CALs are automatically added to your per month license cost or the infrastructure cost, and it is basically divided and made part of that only. So if that is something that you want, you can pretty much have a look at those as well. So these are the two options that I wanted to show you. First was a virtual machine, and second was deploying any sort of resources using the custom scripts or Azure ARM managers. The third sub-module that we have today is regarding container registries. So before going to container registries, first let me tell you what these containers are. So these containers are basically like if I want to use a subset of an operating system's functionalities. Like I want a, a small web server that just hosts a website which I have, and it requires just a web server application with some amount of maybe some Node.js or something installed into that. And but I do not want the entire virtual machine for myself, because a virtual machine does what I need it to, but it also has a lot more to offer which I do not need, but I still have to pay for the cost. So containers, basically what they do is uh, they take a image of a operating system, take only that part of the operating system which is required for the work that you needed to do, and then create a container image. Most popular container images that we containers that we services that we use is Docker. And Docker can basically, you can create slim, lightweight containers which can do a specific job. Let's say, for example, that I create a Docker instance of an Ubuntu Linux which just hosts my website. So if I deploy that particular container, it will always deploy. Everything is pre-configured, and my application is up and running just by typing the IP address that gets assigned. Another Docker container that I have with an Ubuntu in Linux, but it just runs an hourly script every time. So both of them have the same operating system, but only that part of the operating system, or that minimum amount of uh, operating system intervention that is required, and it is running inside a container service, which is allowing it to do those, but not having that entire bloated operating system infrastructure that we have. So containers, or the container instances, like for example, the example that I gave you is one Docker image maybe, or something which I can install and deploy it on my Azure infrastructure. Usually they are done on by installing Docker on a machine, and then you pull the Docker image, and then you host it, and then you expose that. But if you want Azure to deploy that, you just have to create a container instance, choose the Docker image that you want, and it deploys that, and you have access to that. One of the other things that Azure also gives you is container registries. So container registries, container instance, for example, is something which is actually hosting the that container image. But registry is something which you can create as your own personal container registry, wherein you can have different containers created and listed for your organization, which might follow different CI/CD pipelines and stuff, and you continuously keep them updated in there. So it is not a public registry, but your own private registry on Azure, which you can create, and you can have multiple containers with different versions. And when the container instances are deployed, you can choose your own container registry to basically store those and deploy the containers from that particular registry. So first thing that we are going to do is we're going to see how a container registry is created and what are the options that we get in there. So let's just go to the home button. If I just search for container, I'll have these container apps, instances, app environment, and registries. I'll just choose container registries. Come in here, create container registry. In here, I just need to choose the subscription and the resource group. I'll choose session 5 as the resource group. Registry name, let's just say SkyPycast registry or something. And then location, Central India, based on my resource group. Availability zones, whether you want redundancy on these or not. Then you have the SKU, basic, very few options, basic, standard, or premium. For this, I'll just choose basic. Click on next. Networking options, whether you want public access or private access. You can see that I do not have this option because I chose the basic SKU. If it was premium, I could have chosen a private access or a public access. For basic, it is always going to public, but that doesn't matter for me because it's just for demo right now. Go on encryption. That is also, if the premium is chosen, you can choose whether you want to have encryption enabled or not. Then the tags, then the review and create, and you just click on create once the validation passed, and the container registry gets created. So this actually is not something which requires a lot of configuration, because it's just a registry. It keeps your container instances, or it keeps your container repositories in here, and you can use those repositories to deploy them whenever you want. So what we are going to see in here is that if you go to repositories, you will see that all the repositories that you add into this registry, they pretty much start coming up over here. And then you can use these repositories to deploy them in the container instance, which we are going to see next. So let's just do a quick check on how we can uh, create a container registry. For that, what we are going to do is we are going to use the Azure Cloud Shell that we have on the top. We'll just open that up. And once this starts opening up, I'll just. So this is one of the ways that you can create these registries, by the way. So if I just delete this right now, and I'll also show you while we are doing this Cloud Shell thing, I'll also take this opportunity to deploy a cloud, this registry as well using a cloud command as well. So what we have to do is we just need to run this particular command, which is going to create a registry for me. I'm going to create a first registry. So first, resource group is required, which I believe is something which I don't need. So I'm just going to skip this command because I already have a resource group created. So I'll just choose this command instead, which is going to be az group create. Sorry, this is not the one. Same command again. Yep. So this is it. Just got broken into two lines. Let me just prepare this command for you first. So this is the command. Let's say that I have this group that I want to choose. So the resource group value I just need to choose as session 5 because that is the one that I called the resource group. So the command would be AZ-ACR, which is Azure Container Registry. AZ stands for Azure, ACR, Azure Container Registry, create resource group, the value of the resource group, and then name. What is the name that you want to give your container registry to be? So let's just say SkyPycast registry. For good measure, I'll just put a 1 so that it just gives it a name, and click on enter. And if everything is all right, it will just create that registry for us. What we exactly did on the portal side, it is now going to do using this Azure command. Then we will do, what we'll do is we'll use some of the pre-created Docker files or images which Microsoft has to offer. So Microsoft has a container registry wherein they have created a bunch of different uh, artifact registries that are available, which is these small Docker container images that you can use. So in here, there is something called as a hello world, which basically prints a small hello world in your uh, console. So this is the one that we will be going to use, and it will, whenever this runs, it just prints a hello world in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reuse that, and then we are going to create a new file in our local Cloud Shell, which is called as a Docker file, and I'm just going to add this mcr.microsoft.com/hello world, which is the repository, into the Docker file. It is just going to add this small line over there. Then what we are going to do is we are going to create that hello world repository first. For that, I'll just write another command in here, which prepare for you first. Here, there is a one. So this is the command that we need to do, which is AZACR build with an image called sample hello world, which is, if you come in here, this is the sample hello world repository that's going to be used, version 1. Then this is the registry name that we just had added. So our registry name was SkyPycast register. What was the name that I gave? SkyPycast registry 1. I just need to put that same name, registry 1, file, Docker file. It is just going to create that Docker file for us in the file that we created, which was called Docker file, by the way. So it just opens that up, downloads the sample a Docker file from the Microsoft web and puts in there. So once everything happens, you would see a few commands in there. So you see that it's got successfully created. After that, if we want, we can see whether this got created or not. So for that, we just have to run this command, which is azacr repository list, which will basically list the repositories that are available in my registry. So SkyPycast registry 1. If I run, I should see that sample hello world, which means that it got created over there. So if I want to run this registry directly from my Cloud Shell, I can run that as well and see the hello world message directly. So for that, I'll just run this command, which is azacr run command. It will check which is the registry name. So I will put in SkyPycast registry 1 and then say what is the command. So I want to run the sample hello world, and dev null means that it just is going to be echoed directly on the console. So if I run this, I should see a bunch of output come up, but I should be most interested in the hello world message that should come up. So I'll just go and see what happened, and this is the hello world message that came from that Docker instance. So this tells me that the container registry got created. The sample image that I wanted, which was the hello world, it got created in there as well. And my container registry is up and running. Now, if I go to the container registries, I should see that the SkyPycast registry 1 is available in here. If I go to the repositories, I should see that the repository sample hello world is in here. If I go there, there was a version 1 that's in here, and all the details for that basically come up. Okay, so everything in here seems like it's in place right now. But to run that, you basically have to use the az command that we just did, and it should start running that. But that this is just creating a repositories of registry of repositories basically. But it is not creating your actual containers. To create the actual containers, we use this next option, which is called container instances. For me, it's already in here. If for you it's not there, just type in container in your search bar. You should have this option of containers in here. Just go to create container instances. The wizard should come up. Choose the resource group that you want. Give it a name. Let's give it SkyPycast container 1. Location anywhere that you want. For us, it's the central India. Availability, I don't want any. Then you have these option of image sources. So the option that you can choose is quick start images, wherein Microsoft has gives you a few sample images that you can choose and deploy a image, like this mcr.azure docs hello world, which is a simple hello world container like what we deployed. It will deploy it in a 1 CPU, 1.5 gigabyte environment. Then you have a Microsoft OSS Nginx, which is a Linux web server that's get deployed, and you can just have a web server deployed directly on that, which you can interact with. And then there is a sample Windows web server that you can also do install if you want. So these are some of the quick start images that you can choose. If you have a container registry like what we did, so what we can do is we first have to enable an admin for this. It says that admin user must first be enabled for this registry in order to access this image during the container installation. So let's see how that can be done. So we'll just go to the container registry. So in here, the best thing about Azure is that whenever you have these options, you always have these hyperlinks associated with them as well, which says how you can add these enable admin users. So you can see that when we come to this access point, it will give us this access keys option. And in here, there is an option of admin user enabled or disabled. And username and password is pretty much over here. I'll just keep this open just so that I can choose that. I might have to refresh this in here. so that the option gets through. Question 5, SciPyCast container 1, Azure containers. Now that you see, we have enabled the instance, admin instance. It just comes up. It says which registry, SciPyCast registry, what image we have created, just one, which is the hello world image tag, which is the version 1 of that, and it gets created. So this is another option that you can choose. If you have your own container registry, you can deploy the image directly from that. Or if you want, maybe from Docker, if you go to docker.mcr, I think it's my Docker registry. So this is the uh, so these are the Docker images that you can public Docker images. Yeah, this is the hub.docker.com. So this is the hub.docker.com. In here, if you want to search for something, let's say MySQL or something. So you can pretty much search for different Docker images that you want to deploy. Let's say that if this is the MySQL Docker image, if you just click on that, you will see the Docker image name or the URL that you have. So this is the URL that is available, and you pretty much can use either these or Microsoft's registry that we saw. So you can use any of these URLs from any public or private container registries, and you can use those as well. So for us, for this particular demo, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a quick start image, which is a Linux Nginx image, which will just give us a web server that gets created, and we'll access that and see how that goes. So I'll just choose that for now. For your own purpose, you can create your own images, create your own Docker images. You can have any Docker images that you find on Microsoft registry or official Docker registry and use that as well. In here, there is an option that whether you want to have this container available publicly, privately, or you do not want to have any access to those from anywhere apart from this portal. So those are options. I choose the public because I want to access the container publicly. The IP address would be provided to me, but if you want to put a DNS to it, meaning a domain, you can put that as well. So I'll put a SciPyCast test1 or something, and it will have SciPyCast test1.centralindia.azurecontainer.io. So this is going to be the URL that I can use to access the web server on the container. You can see that the 80 port is already added to be enabled so that that web server can start working. Click on advanced. There is an option of a restart policy. So there are instances, or there could be scenarios wherein your container might stop or it might fail. So the restart policy of your instance would basically dictate how the container would restart in what cases. So the restart policy in here by default is on failure. If it means that if the container fails for some reasons, it automatically restarted. But there are always options like always. If you choose always, it will keep on restarting it after some times. It never means that whatever happens, even in case of errors or any sort of failures, it won't restart. So usually the default policy should be on failure so that if the uh, container fails for some reason, it automatically gets restarted, which usually solves the problems. Next, we go to tags. If there are any that you want to add, click on review create and click on the create button. So once this happens, it will take a few minutes to get the deployment. It is again, if you go to the deployment, you will see that the JSON template file gets created with different input and outputs. As was mentioned previously, if you want the same thing to be done over and over again, you can save these, download these, or add them directly to the library so that you have them available later on, so that the same deployment can be done multiple times whenever you want. So these are some of the features or benefits that you have from the Azure portal, wherein these container instances or these, sorry, the template instances can be saved so that they can be resubmitted back to the Azure Resource Manager whenever you need them. So let's see, just created, deployment is complete. I'll just go to the resource. When I go to the resource, you will see that I have an IP address assigned to me. I'll just copy this and just go to the web browser and hit that, and you will see that this is the default page or the home page that the web server has, which is the Nginx. And now that particular website is hosted over there, and it has this default value. You can either access it using this IP address, or you can access it using the domain name that we gave, which was skypicast.test1.centralindiaazurecontainer.io. So you can access the same using this domain as well, and it will redirect you to the same page. Now, if you want to have access to this container or what is happening inside that container in the container portal, you come to the settings window, and in here you see the container. Now, if you want to see all the events that are happening, you can see that in the events tab. Properties can be seen on the properties tab. Logs, everything that is happening on the server, all the logs are pretty much seen in here. If you want to connect to the server using a bin bash or a bin shell, a bourne again shell or a shell, you can just click on connect, and the connection starts with a bash shell connection. And as soon as that happens, you will see the cursor come up in here, and you should be able to basically connect to the server, do whatever you want in there, and run commands, deploy any other files or something connected to the GitHub and stuff, and get your code deployed. Since it's a basic container that I deployed, it might take some time to get the console up and running, just because it takes time. I just refresh and try it again. It usually takes some time to get deployed on this. So the point is that if you want to connect into that, for some reason it's not connecting right now. But if you want, you can connect it directly through here. Or what you can also do is you can use uh, this option of the IP address and then use any sort of SSH access that you want and connect it directly to using the SSH. But for that, one of the things that we need to remember is that uh, this particular container that we deployed, we only enabled port 18 to that. So if we are trying to enable SSH into that, we have to enable the SSH port while deploying that as well. So that is something that you can do if you want to have access to this particular site from SSH as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this particular session, guys. So I'll now take any questions if there are any. Good. All right. Thanks a lot for joining, everyone, and see you in the next session next week. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.